right, well, let's get started. Welcome back. We're continuing our series, Living God's Love, the idea of spiritual disciplines, but in a relational approach, right? As means, mechanisms, ways to deepen our relationship with God, our relationship with each other. And also, it's a process by which it produces maturity in us. It creates opportunities through that relationship, through those practices, bettering and deepening our relationship with God. Also, it has a healing impact on us spiritually, emotionally, I would argue then physically. And so we're taking that approach through each one of these practices. Last week was the idea of mindfulness, which might have been a little out of the norm for maybe most of our day-to-day. I made a couple recommendations on ways to try that out. Anybody want to share how that might have gone?
I got the app and I used it 6 times.
Oh, good. Yeah, did you feel like it was helpful?
I did. I need to explore further.
Yes, there's a lot of the Australian accent.
Like it?
Yeah, it's a little out of a little intriguing there.
Like it, Mike.
Yeah. One way to use that app is it has like a whole category of like rest and sleeping, and you can start it as you're about to go to bed, and it just kind of runs its thing, and you fall asleep sometimes halfway through it, and it's just there's a lot of cool categories in the app. Well, good.
For those of us who weren't here last week, what's the name of the app?
Smiling Mind. Smiling Mind. Yeah, it's a really cool app. It's free. It's based on some Australian research out of Australia and does the accent. So it's kind of guided meditation or mindfulness. All right, so today we're going to talk about Sabbath, the idea of Sabbath and how it is meant to be a practice, a spiritual practice that I think the imagery I've used is, we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. I think we have done that with Sabbath. I get the whole, we're not under the old law, and, we're not sacrificing animals, and, going to the priest to have our rash looked at. So I get all that, and I'm on board with it. But I think the Sabbath has been bundled in there and thus thrown away, and I think that's been to our detriment. So to make that case, let's walk through it as we go here. So, of course, I'm going to start in Genesis because Sabbath actually does not begin in the law of Moses. It is incorporated in it, and I think with good reason and purpose to it, but it begins in the beginning. So, recap, the creation story in Genesis 1 and 2 begins with God creating the realities, the realms. The way it phrased there is the heaven and the earth, which once again there does not yet mean the sky and this dirt we're on. That's, I think, day 4. It really just means the spiritual realm and the physical realm. The world of God and that spiritual reality and this physical reality. This physical reality begins chaotic. It begins dark and void and dreary and stormy, and it's unmolded. And it's the Spirit of God hovering, I'm paraphrasing the first couple verses, it's the Spirit of God hovering over that chaos that begins a transformative process. From chaos to order, from darkness to light, from uncertainty to purpose. And it's a process that is happening by the sheer proximity of God, the sheer presence of God. Then it begins kind of in those specifics, day 1, day 2, day 3. And there's a lot of cool layers to that we don't have time to discuss. But at the end of each day, God concludes that it is good. And God saw that it is good. And God saw that it is good. And God saw that it is good. Which is a repetitive, that repetitiveness is a literary device for emphasis. And of course it's good because God's presence is one of transforming chaos into good, right? It's a process towards beauty, towards harmony, towards peace and purpose and creativity. And it's important because in the ancient world, unlike today, where most of our basic scientific premise is one where we want answers of how do we go from nothing to something. Right? So a lot of our Big Bang and whatever other theories were like, okay, but how did we go from nothing? What was there before? And then what was there before that? And what was like this cause and effect? The ancient world did not care about nothingness to something. They cared about chaos to order. So other creation stories all begin chaotic. And most of the way chaos is dealt with in the other creation stories is through violence, power play, armies, swords, that kind of thing, right? The gods against the monsters of chaos and so forth. So God's presence is about transforming chaos, which is really cool too, because much later in the story, it is the Spirit in us that pushes out the darkness. It's the Spirit in us through Jesus' death, burial, resurrection, baptism. The Spirit of God is in us, and it's transformative. Right? It's transforming us from the chaos of evil and sin to the kind of people that God intended us to be, and thus, as a gathered community of people that are being transformed, we do so in a relational way. We're encouraging, molding, impacting, influencing each other, and thus why Paul says, or Paul, or whoever wrote Hebrews, that we shouldn't forsake the assembly, because there's a transformative power happening as we interact, because God is with us. Okay. So the process there of creation is culminated in day 7. The number 7 takes on a very important symbolic role in the storyline because it symbolizes completeness, fullness, maturity, achieving the goal. Okay? So when we get to day 7, in Genesis chapter 2, who would read 2, verse 1 to 3?
Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation.
Okay. Who would read then? Let's go to Exodus chapter 20. Let's see how this is incorporated into the law of Moses. Exodus 20, verse 8 through 11.
Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. The 7th day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, the sojourner who is within your gates. For 11?
Yes.
For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy.
Okay. So it's incorporated in the story of Moses, right? Because if we fast forward, by the time God brings Moses into the scene, God's people is once again in chaos, right? They're being ruled over by darkness, by this destructive, abusive rule of Egypt. And Egypt is grinding the people back into the dust, which is a connection. It's trying to connect the reader to Genesis, where evil comes back into, evil is in the, breaks back into creation. And then because of that, death is now a thing, and we go back to the dust from which we came. So in Egypt, during the rule of Egypt and Israel being under that, it's like that's being emphasized. They're in a world of chaos, of death, of pain, of suffering, where they're just being it's just grinding them back into the dust. So they're in chaos, and God, through Moses, has this 10 smackdowns with the gods of Egypt, and that's what we call the plagues. And God highlights the pain and suffering that world is in by deconstructing it. Okay, so the 10 plagues are a reversal of the creation story, which is really cool. Once again, can't walk through every single point there. But so the end result of it is they're freed to live in a world where God's presence is going to be with them, and they go to Mount Sinai where God comes from the heavens and is going to be present and is going to be transformative. And as they're going to be transformed, one of the mechanisms by which are practices, which they called laws, where we could call an equivalent to spiritual practices. They were mechanisms that were helping the people be transformed by the presence of God. Does that make sense? So don't think of them just legislation. It had a very practical impact. The 10 Commandments were the heart of that, and one of those commandments is keep the Sabbath. Why is that foundational? Why is that a necessity? Why would you put that as top 10? Thoughts? What's the Sabbath really about? Rest? Was God just plumb out tired? He's just like zapping things into reality, and he just, I'm going to sit down.
I think it's about appreciation.
Appreciation?
Respect.
Okay. What else?
Reflection.
Yes. Reflection. What was the Israelites supposed to reflect upon?
Who's in control?
Who's in control? Who is in control?
God is.
God. And why is that important? Why does that matter?
He gives order.
Okay, he's in charge. But why is it good news and worth contemplating and taking a whole day to be like, ooh, God's in charge?
A lot of times we think we are.
Yeah, first it takes that illusion, right? Where it addresses that illusion that we're in charge. But what does God's control imply? Or what effects does that have? That God's in charge.
I wonder if it's, because it says, for 6 days you shall work, and on the seventh day you shall rest.
Yes.
And I think it may be a way of God, a way for us to remember that, we have all this stuff going on for 6 days, but the seventh day we're supposed to stop, reflect on God, reflect what He's done for us, the blessings that He's given us, spending it with family, friends, the things that we do, church family, or whatever the case may be. Just, I think it's God was putting a reminder in there to say, okay, these 6 days, are crazy and hectic, but this day is mine, and it's supposed to be focused on me.
Okay, good, yes. 6 days we work. It's intense. In Genesis 3, and the list of consequence, Genesis 3 is not a list of God's chosen punishments for humanity. It's a descriptive list of what we have unleashed upon ourselves. There's a difference. Okay? It's God describing, here's the world you're unleashing. And one of those has to do with work. And in Genesis 3, what kind of work is humanity now going to experience? Hard, painful, dreadful, difficult, tense work unto death. Isn't that exciting? Day in, day out, you're closer to death, and you're a lot of suffering towards it. So 6 days is reminding us of the hell we've unleashed upon ourselves, or the chaos, if we want to go with that imagery. What's that one Sabbath supposed to, in contrast to that reality, remind us of? Is it just a time for a good old nap?
The perfect creation.
The world that we were supposed to be living in. So when God takes a Sabbath rest in Genesis, it's not just about take a breather. It's not just about let's make that a good Sunday afternoon nap. It's about the kind of world that God had completed and the kind of world God had intended for us to live in. And interesting, each day leading up to that, it says, and it was morning and evening. Day 1, it was morning or evening, morning and evening. Day 2, day 3, morning and evening. Day morning and evening, morning and evening, morning and evening. You get to day 7, there's no end. Like the day didn't end. It's meant to be open-ended in the sense of this is the world you now will live in. A world where God has rested from pushing chaos out and from creating a reality filled with beauty, harmony, purpose, peace, where humanity was in harmony with self, with each other, with the creation God had made, and with God. That is open-ended for us to be experiencing. However, we unleash a horrible mess upon ourselves, and now we have 6 days to remind us of that horrible mess. The 7th day is to be a day not just that you physically rest, it is to remember the kind of reality God created and the kind of reality God can and is once again creating. And here's the cool thing. As representatives on this physical realm of what God is on the cosmic realm, you and I are to be agents of Sabbath rest. So when the Israelites took that day to remember all this, that the world is a horrible mess. We live in a world of working unto death. We live in a world of chaos. Yet God is a God that in the presence of chaos pushes all that out. That God intended the reality to be different, to be harmonious, to be peaceful, to be beautiful, to be relationally interactive with self, others, creation, God. And you and I, by taking that day, slowing down, not working unto death, encouraging others not to work unto death. You understand the Sabbath wasn't just for the royal elite. It was for the peasant, the rich, the poor, the single, the married, the donkey, the servant, the foreigner, anybody and everybody that came into that community was going to be blessed by that day. And thus a reminder that then for the next 6 days, what would it look like if we actually tried to be Sabbath-like in our relationships, in our interactions, and the way we did our business, and the way we did work, and the way we did finances. So Sabbath wasn't just a day, it was a reality to be experienced, remembered, and then promoted. Buddy, does this make sense? Sounds brilliant in my head, but I'm not sure if it's coming across. Anybody want to kind of reflect here. What am I saying to make sure it's coming across?
So I don't think we're Sabbathing properly.
Oh, no, we're not. Yeah, I think
That's
you're.
what I'm getting.
I think you're. So the Hebrew there is Shabbat, which is kind of fun to say, Shabbat. We're not Shabbating. Is that a verb? Can you verb it? Conjugated. We're not Shabbating well, that's for sure. It's, first of all, we don't even take the reminder. Well, but we're not Jews and we're not under the law. Okay, listen. That was all introduced in the creation story. It got incorporated into the law. It was a concept before Moses. It's a concept through the storyline of the Bible. And it's not just about, quote unquote, one particular day. Okay? But we don't even do that. Right? We don't even take, we barely take a nap. Right? Because we're too busy working unto death. Some of us are accelerating that process by working so hard. To each their own. So we don't even do that. But then we seldom take the time to even have reminders in our daily rhythms of what that reality should be different from the world we're in. The world we're in is not God's intended world. It's a contaminated world. And it's contaminated into back grinded into dust is what we're experiencing. So we need to, yes, take a breather. Yes, Barry?
Just trying to think outside the box here a little bit, is that one of the reasons why you think Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper was for us to stop, take a breather, and remember Him and what His sacrifice was?
I think it's that and even cooler. I don't think Sunday replaces the Sabbath. I think Sunday begins the reality of the Sabbath. So in other words, Saturday, the Jews would have been taking the Sabbath, right? Even though they were, in the time of Jesus, under horrible oppression. So even the Sabbath was not restful. And because of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, it promotes the opportunity and creates the means by which we can now live a reality that is not contaminated by evil, that is not just about death and work and abuse and intensity. So Sunday, it's like the new day where we can now live a new Sabbath, like a Sabbath reality. So I think even that is intentional, that Jesus comes to life and thus creates a new life for all of us on the next day. It's like the Sabbath reality now is achieved. Now we can live it out. So on the other side of the crucifixion, you and I are in a sense living a Sabbath now but not yet, which is one of my points. Yes, it is one of my points.
Hey, Mel, one thing,
Yes.
when you were saying all this, one thing that kind of seemed to hit me was maybe in the remembering that at one time we were estranged from God.
Yes.
Now God is near and He's with us, and He asks us to pause and reflect on that, so that as we're living in this world, this broken world, we have His presence with us.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And we are to then be that presence unto others. So when you go back into the chaos, say on Monday morning, take the Shabbat with you. Be a Shabbat unto others. Be a relational presence of rest. Your presence can calm people, push chaos out by the way you do your business, by the way you interact with your team, by the way you treat the stranger. You are bringing some of that Shabbat into the world. And that is so much more than just a good nap, which, once again, I'm a fan. I think we should do the occasional that. So to Barry's point, let's read Hebrews. Here it's on your outline. Who wants to read Hebrews 4, 8 through 11? some quotes there. Hebrews 4, 8 through 11.
For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken later about another day. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. Let us, therefore, make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience.
Okay, so the Sabbath rest wasn't just meant to be a day of remembrance. That's part of their weekly rhythms, right? It was one day a week, but then it was one day a week, but then every once a year, it also had kind of a bigger celebration. And then on the 7th year, it had a bigger celebration. And then on the 7 times 7, which was the year of Jubilee, it had like a major celebration. So it wasn't just Saturdays, okay? It was Saturdays, then there was a yearly thing, a 7-year thing, and a 49-year thing. All that was not just reminding people to take a breather, wasn't just reminding people of what God did there in Genesis. It was also guiding people into a reality that was soon to unfold. And in Israel's case, we're going to a promised land that will be restful in contrast to you being under the rule of a pagan empire, the Egyptians. Here you'll be restful in comparison. Doesn't mean they're going to take naps for the rest of their existence in the land. It just means in contrast, it's quite restful. Here you're going to do your own thing with the presence of God. Nobody's ruling over. You're not being, grinded back into the dust. Here's the sorry thing about all that. That wasn't completely achieved. Because first of all, how they even entered the land was already like a kind of a rough start. They had to learn this 40-year lesson about trusting God. They finally do enter the land. They didn't push chaos out. When they come into the land, there is chaos on the land. So just like in Genesis, through the people in the land, they were supposed to push all chaos out. They didn't. They didn't. So for the foreseeable centuries unfolding, they were still in conflict with the Philistines and a bunch of other things. So they never truly even achieved the physical rest in that land, because they really didn't do what God wanted them to do and illustrated in Genesis 1 and 2. So here the writer of Hebrews is noting, hey, we haven't even done that well. You might still be keeping it once a week, but we haven't done that well, especially by the time this is being written. They're still under the Romans. So even that isn't restful. But in Jesus is that new day where we can now live in a reality that is restful, even as the world of chaos continues around us. Does this make sense? Okay, so Hebrews, back to chapter 4, if we back up a few verses, verse 6 and 7. Therefore, since it is still remains for some to enter that rest, and since those who formerly had the good news proclaimed to them did not go into because of their disobedience, God again set a certain day, calling it today. So when is our Sabbath? Today. But wait, today's Wednesday. Yes. And then tomorrow, it'll be then. And then the next, it's to be the present reality we try to live out. Okay. This he did when a long time later he spoke through David, as in the passage already quoted, today is if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. So the Sabbath reality we're supposed to live out daily is if we listen to God and he is with us. So what would that look like? Some day-to-day living. What would living Shabbat look like on a daily existence? Yes.
I don't know that I know the answer to that, but what I see is in all of the
the practices that we've talked about, they all fold beautifully into one another. And just going back to even last week's lesson about mindfulness and using that time to kind of center yourself on God's word, or to calm yourself, or whatever it is, that if we are taking that spiritual practice of mindfulness, or meditating on God's word, that prepares our hearts and minds to be ready to live this out.
Yes.
As far as that Sabbath mindset on a daily basis.
Yeah, so mindful is really about focusing on the now, which just happened to be what God asked us to do. Today is how I'm going to be Shabbat. So I don't know about tomorrow. Yesterday's already passed. Now I'm going to be Shabbat. And part of that is focus in that moment, right? Like breathing, anchoring your thoughts in scripture or breath, or, there's a lot of other ways you can do it. But it's the today. Okay, what else? How can we incorporate that Shabbat concept? Because once again, Sabbath is not just a Saturday. It's a reality that God wants us to live out. How can I incorporate that on my daily rhythms?
This whole time you've been talking, I've been thinking about peace.
Yeah.
That it's just a peaceful. And that there are some people in your life that it's just a calming that they give you. And if you can practice that and be that for other people, then I think that would be, we need more peace people in our lives.
Yes. And we should be a community that is therapeutically peaceful to one another. I mean the gathering of the church, it should be peaceful for one another. And thus we should be able to then enjoy that, nurture that, and then go out and be that for others. Good. What else? How can we?
I might be going down the wrong road here, but it talks about, if there was not another day later on, and how there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. So whoever's entered that rested from his works also. So in the old concept, there was work to stay within God's grace.
Yeah.
Right with God. Mm-hmm. But when you have entered that rest, you are in God's grace. Mm-hmm. So there's not all the work.
Yeah. Think of, I don't know, have you, well, don't raise your hand. But just think about this. Did you ever date somebody that was high maintenance? Don't raise your hand or look at your spouse if you're married to them. But if you ever dated somebody that's high maintenance versus dating somebody that's not high maintenance, like this feels like work, right? You're just like, man, you're just having to earn it, and like it's nonstop work. And though the non-high maintenance here, what's the opposite of high maintenance? The easygoing? Low maintenance. Low maintenance. Okay, thank you. Low maintenance. The low maintenance person, the practices might be the same. Like you still make a call, you still text, you still gonna walk, you still do this, still do that, but it just feels like work. And here it's just a relational connection. And I think that's the difference. It's not that in Jesus we don't have to do anything. I'm ready for heaven, and we just warm the pews until that day comes. No, there's a lot to be done. There's a lot to be maturing through, but it's not because God is high maintenance and we have to like earn our salvation. We got to do this stuff, otherwise God leaves us and abandons us and goes find somebody else to date. That's not the relationship. The things we're doing is because God is like, he wants us, he facilitates for us to come in. He wants to be in a relationship with us. He's quite forgiving and filled with grace, and like he wants us to stay near and with him. So I think of that, high maintenance versus low maintenance.
The difference between something that you want to do versus something you feel like you have.
You have to. And if you don't, you're going to be punished by it, right? Yeah, I think that's right. A loving relationship versus some kind of like a checklist, right, of things I must do.
Talking about how
we can be the Sabbath in our own lives.
Mhm.
Kind of that idea in Matthew 12, he talks about how he's the Lord of the Sabbath.
Yes.
And how it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. So just doing good to other people around us.
And how offensive that was somehow. That Jesus had the courage to go do good things on a day that they technically were supposed to be resting. Because what they understood the Sabbath to be was really a day of like, do no work. And they got so, people are like, what does that even mean, right? Well, my in-laws invited me to come eat at their house. Can I go? Ooh, I don't know. How far do you have to walk? So like there was a whole debate about that. Like, well, if it's 2 miles, maybe. If it's 3 miles, probably not. Okay, well, if it's within 2 miles, I can go. Yeah. What if they ask us to bring something? Then I'm carrying. Is that like, that's more work? Is it okay, well, you can carry 1 bag, not 2 bags. What if my mother-in-law wants me to, bring a chair? Well, I mean, then that's one of those high maintenance people. So, like, they really were that intense about it. Really were that intense to figure it all out. And had all these rules. And Jesus is like, wait, you're missing the point. You're missing the point. And thus he says, I am the Lord of the Sabbath because I am the Sabbath achieved. In me, you are Shabbat. And it's about caring for others and betterment and being a force for good and bringing healing. That's what it is. I don't know, take a nap, that's great. It's really about this reality that you're trying to be a part of and then nurture on to others, ripple effect unto others. Okay, so I don't know. Does this mean you should keep a Saturday? I think that'd be fine. If you can squeeze that in there somewhere, or even a Monday afternoon, I mean, whatever day, a day that you actually say, like, this is a time where I'm not going to work. I'm going to spend with family. I'm going to really be mindful of it. I'm going to spend in prayer. I'm going to be thinking of just the many wonderful things God has done for me. I'm going to contemplate my week. I'm going to try to do next week better. Like, I think it'd be great, even if it's an hour. So some kind of moment like that, I think would be great. Now, are we going to be legalistic if you don't keep the Sabbath? No, I don't think that's the way to go. That's definitely not. But the best understanding we have is the Jews that came to Jesus did not stop keeping the Sabbath, like the literal day of Saturday. They did that, and then they were extremely joyful the very next day because it's also marks a new beginning of actually living out a Sabbath. So if you want to keep a day, a moment, a morning, an hour, I think that'd be great, where you can kind of rest, focus, relax, re-energize for the week. But beyond that, I think we do need to find times throughout our rhythms to be restful. And by this, I literally mean rest. Man, our bodies just can't be go, go, go. Like, it beats you down. The body needs to re-energize. That's what sleep is for, but we don't even do that well. You ever wake up more tired than you went to bed? Like, you just low energy, like just your body just can't keep up with it. So we live in a world where actually being busy is something to be proud of. Oh man, I'm so busy at work. Like we almost say it like, yeah, I'm just that kind of person. We work so hard. Like sometimes you start a job, what do you get, like 1 week off? And then if you put 5 years into it, you get 2. And then if you're like one of those SI executives, really, and then you get like 3. I think that's all broken. We measure productivity wrong. There are studies that show that you're actually more productive with rest and breaks and all. I mean, that's scientifically proven, but we shouldn't have to depend on that proving. God meant for us to have a weekly rhythm of some rest. So the assignment that I want us to think about is a couple of things. One is, well, let me just throw it out, then I'll give you some specific. Why is taking time to rest so difficult in the world we live in? Why is that so challenging? You ever feel guilty? I took a nap, you know.
Even meant to think it's lazy.
You're lazy. How dare you care about your health and the well-being of those around you, right? Yeah, so there's even a sense of shame. We feel like we're being lazy, unproductive. What else? Why is it so hard to?
Because you can always turn on the TV or the computer, and you're not working, but you're not resting either.
That's right. Yeah. Even then, you might be sitting on the couch, but you're not resting. Right? Your mind's still going wild, intensely. If you sit down, I'm going to just like relax, and then you turn on one of those like high drama, reality shows about some particular family or some rapper or something. Like, come on. Like, you can feel the tension of the setup and the whole drama. Like, we're even addicted to that. We can't even just... We have to have some... The way some of you watch sports, you really should take a pill. Like, you feel the tension. You're not actually, you're still sitting on the couch, but you like tense up, you breathe, your heart's like it's like you're
on the field.
That's right. Why, you're still sitting on the couch, Like, bring me the chips, but... So even that's not restful. That's fine, watch the game, but that's not rest. Right? Because you're still emotionally, ramped up. Then your team has a horrible season. Oh, messes with you. Here's what I recommend. Here's a suggestion. Why don't you make a list of ways you want to incorporate Shabbat into your rhythm, right? You could have a daily practice, and that could be one of our spiritual practices. It could be, I'm going to take a 10-minute to do some mindfulness. I'm going to go for a 10-minute walk on my lunch break, like something daily. Just something daily. It can be small. A weekly practice. Maybe be an afternoon off, or I'm really going to take Saturday morning off. I'm going to go with my family, breakfast, like something weekly restful. And then maybe a monthly practice, a yearly practice, could be a vacation, like something to center you, relax, rest, take a weekly nap, just make a list of some ideas. And then try to put some of that into practice and see why that's so hard. See why that's so hard, the implementation of it. Why is that so hard? And I think that alone will be insightful. Everybody good? Questions, thoughts, complaints?
We all have time to scroll.
Oh, yeah.
And I think, why am I scrolling? I should be reading, I should be praying, I should be practicing mindfulness.
Yeah, so many other things. And even that, social media, man, people that make all these things are brilliant, because all this has an addictive element to it. It's really well thought out of how they put those things together. But it's not very productive. There's all kinds of studies now that makes you more depressed, it hypes your anxiety, you feel like your life is less, than there's a bunch of negatives that come with it. For sure. All right, well, let's have a prayer, and then let's go eat in Shabbat this next week. Dear God, we thank you for the opportunity, the privilege to be about your kingdom, to be people that are to live in your rest, with your presence, the chaos being pushed out, our hearts, our minds, our relationships, as a community of faith, that we can embody and incorporate that in our lives, and then that we can go out and bring that rest unto the world. Thank you for Jesus and being Lord of the Sabbath. And in his name we pray.